Tragedy and Hope. It's all now being basically controlled by what is known as the Round Tables, that was created by Cecil Rhodes. They developed what is known as the Council on Foreign Relations. You've heard them in the news almost every week. They're a very dynamic organization. And what we're seeing in this dynamic organization is the literal fulfillment of Cecil Rhodes' concept of world domination. He wanted to draw all power to the British Isles, or to Great Britain. Well, it's expanded now to Great Britain and the United States, but the fact is that we have a situation through the Council on Foreign Relations whose their whole purpose is to create a world government. Now, saying that, realize that most members of the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR as they're popularly known, have no idea that they are involved in this kind of an organization. They're there because of prestige, they're there because they believe it's helpful to their political advancement, they're there for any number of reasons, but the fact is the CFR is a front for the Round Tables. At the same time, in Great Britain is the Institute of International Affairs. They're doing the same thing in Great Britain. The Bilderbergers are yet another, and the Club of Rome another. The Club of Rome is a very, very occult organization. And then finally, created by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Trilateral Commission back in 1973. These are all fronts. Now from these fronts, hundreds and hundreds of more organizations have been created, making it so diffuse that no one really knows who belongs to what. And I believe that was deliberate, because what they found was that in the process, if you have a single organization called the Illuminati, which was in existence, it's too easy a target. The Freemasons were being accused of too many things, and as a consequence, all of these things, they split off into these many myriads of organizations, led primarily by the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, the Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, the Institute of International Affairs, but there are a lot more. Now, they don't work in lockstep, and it would be a mistake to think that they do. They basically work together towards a common goal, and power figures come and go during this whole time, but nonetheless, they're all working towards a world government, and with some of them working towards a world religion as well. Let's go back to 1974 in a Foreign Affairs article, because Foreign Affairs is the quarterly publication of the CFR, or the Council on Foreign Relations. If you see an article expounding something new within the Foreign Affairs, know that it's either a trial balloon, they're floating it to see how well it's accepted, or it's going to be policy within the next 2 to 3 years of the United States. It's that, I mean, it's that clear cut. And this is what he says. Richard Gardner, who was one of the co-founders of the Trilateral Commission, writing in Foreign Affairs in 1974, he says, in short, the House of World Order would have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. And what is he talking about? Throughout history, these people have been trying to force a world government on society. It has not worked. The League of Nations after World War II, the United Nations, World War I, the United Nations after World War II, they did not work the way they were hoping they would work. And as a consequence, what they had to do is to start to work from the ground up. And they needed to create all of these myriad of organizations to do that. Continuing on with what he said, it will look like a great, booming, buzzing confusion. Isn't that the case? Everything is happening all around us. We have no idea where it's coming from, except it's all seem to be heading in the same direction. Amazing thing about that. It would look like a great, booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James' famous description of reality. But an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. So, back in the early 1970s, they realized they had to take a multi-dimensional approach on this and begin to work at the international, national level across a broad spectrum of our societies. No aspect of our societies has gone untouched. Education, our judicial system, our political system, even our corporate system has been greatly, greatly, greatly impacted by this agenda. If we go back to Tragedy and Hope, written by Carroll Quigley back in 1966, we find this is what he's predicting for the future. This cartel expected that they would be able to control both parties equally. Indeed, Some of them intended to contribute to both and allow an alternation between the two parties in public office in order to conceal their own influence, inhibit any exhibition of independence by politicians, and allow the electorate to believe that they were exercising their own free choice. Going on page 866, it is increasingly clear that in the 20th century, the expert will replace the industrial tycoon in control of the economic system, even as he will replace the democratic voter in control of the political system. This planning may not be single or unified, but it will be planning in which the main framework and the operational forces of the economic system will be established and limited by the experts on the governmental side, and then the experts on the economic side will do their planning within these established limitations. In other words, we have really no free choice in what we're doing, other than a few choices these experts or the cartel allow us to do. Going on, hopefully the elements of choice and freedom may survive for the ordinary individual in that he may be free to make a choice between two opposing political groups, even if these groups have little policy choice within the parameters of policy established by the experts. But in general, his freedom, our freedom, and choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives. It's shocking to remember that he wrote this in 1966. Today we're seeing almost everything that he wrote being fulfilled before our very eyes. We have very limited options as to what we can do. If you're too young, you probably don't remember the type of freedom that was in existence back in 1966, 1970. Today, we don't have that. We're basically controlled by planners in everything that we do. Not only that, but our education is controlled, or at least heavily influenced. Our judicial system, our government, all the way from the federal government all the way down to the local government. It's amazing. What Carroll Quigley said was going to happen has happened. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 7 and 8. He says in verse 7, "After that, my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the other former beasts. It had 10 horns." And Daniel is describing, and it's also found in the book of Revelation, a confederacy of some sort of 10 nations or 10 kingdoms. Now, historically, we've looked at that as being the old European, or the old Europe, the 10 horns of the beast. For generations, what we found, and this was defined by the Club of Rome in the 1973 period, right at the time the Trilateral Commission was created, is that they envisioned a world, not just Europe, but a world divided up into 10 kingdoms. And I'm not going to go into any great detail right now. I'll come back to what has actually happened in a moment. But they actually saw the world would be divided up into 10 nations, or 10 kingdoms. What is actually happening now, it became very obvious in the International Conference for Financing for Development of the United Nations in Monterrey, Mexico in March of 2002. They came out with a policy of regionalizing the world. And that's beginning to happen now. The first one is the Free Trade Zones of America. That has been, you've been seeing that in the news the last several years. The second one, obviously, is the European Union. The third is the Russian Federation, which often joins with the European Union to try to spoil the Anglo-American faction. The fourth is ASEAN, where China is dominant within the Southeastern Asian area. The fifth is going to be in the South Pacific. It hasn't really been that far along yet, but you're seeing Australia taking a greater and greater role into the political situations and activities of the South Pacific. The sixth is the Arab League, or what will derive out of the Arab League. It looks like it's going to be changing its name into something else here in the next year or so, so we'll have to wait and see. But that is the sixth one. The seventh one is the African Union. The African Union came into existence when I was in South Africa in 2002 attending the World Summit on Sustainable Development. It is a process that I don't think will finally reach fruition. I think it's going to be divided into two. Just like I think the Free Trade Zones of the Americas will not survive as one single entity, but will actually divide into two. When that happens, what we will have is 9 different regions, financial or economic regions in the world. That still leaves out Japan. And it could be that Japan, South Korea, and perhaps even Taiwan, which has a huge economic effect on the world, will form its own union between the three nations. I don't know. Nothing's really been said about it yet, but if it does, it'll be the